Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our cybersecurity series. My name is Vlad, and in 2025, I try to help you engage in cybersecurity, learn more about this exciting field, and maybe perhaps kickstart your career. In the previous videos, we discussed about the main cybersecurity properties and how it's really different in terms of mindset than the traditional IT, in the sense that we really focus on managing adversaries, so hackers who have their own objectives and trying to defend ourselves against such threats. This video we will focus on why you, as a person, as an individual, as a functioning member of our society, should care really about cybersecurity. And this video really, maybe it could have been the first one that I did, but I really wanted us to start with the same understanding of what cybersecurity is about. And to get us started, I have here a quote from The Office. So it's a famous TV show, and basically the character here, so Dwight says, identity theft is not a joke, and this is what this video is about. So identity theft can really be facilitated by cybersecurity, or should I say cybercrime, when it is used maliciously. And I have taken some time to record this video because I wanted to find some actual figures and numbers to give you a perspective on how much identity theft weighs on the overall industry, on the overall economy. And I found this article in the US. So it's based on the studies from two NGOs. The first one is called the AARP, so the American Association of Retired People. So it's focusing obviously on the elderly, which are more prone to be targeted by cybersecurity fraud or theft in general. And the second NGO is really focusing on identity theft or impersonation. So what they have identified is that overall, the cost of fraud in 2023 ranged around $43 billion, which is absolutely significant. And what's even more striking when you think about the the US as a country, as a population. So today, the US, it's approximately 330 million inhabitants. Here, they estimated that approximately 15 million American adults were targeted by identity theft and identity fraud in general. And even if the number of victims was quite stable, at least since the few years, the total losses grew by 13%, which is quite impressive from 2022 to 2023. When we look deeper at what do we mean exactly by identity fraud, we understand that there are two main areas. So the first one is the account takeover. So basically, attackers taking over a banking account and draining all the resources, all the funds, all the actions, or all the assets that you might have. And the second type of fraud is the new account fraud. So what the attackers do is that based sometimes on your personal information like ID card, passport, pictures, statements, etc. They can open an account on your behalf. They take some loans, they cash out everything, and then you are left with the debt. And sometimes it can be quite struggling for individuals and families to prove that they were not the ones subscribing for such loans. And that goes really with the last figure that I have here on the slide at the bottom right. It's really striking to understand that 16% of the victims thought about ending their lives. So they thought about suicide, and this number has really gone up in the last decades. The article, and you have the link if you want to check it out, basically says that in the early 2000s, they were estimated that 2 to 3% of the victims were thinking of suicide. But now the scale of the fraud and the impact on the families, especially low income neighborhoods, can really be devastating as a victim. It's not only about the US. Of course, I cannot look at all of the countries, but I chose to look at the US because it's a bigger market, and I also wanted to look at the UK because when you look at the European Union, London is still the financial place. It's way ahead of Luxembourg, Geneva, or Paris in terms of transactions, in terms of assets under management. So the UK is quite interesting also as a financial market. So there was another study that I also found on Business Reporter. Basically, they estimated that the cost of identity theft, was approximately 4 billion pounds. And that's the 2022 figures. And those figures are believed to be underreported in the sense that they come from an aggregation of information from the authorities, from the banking institutions themselves. And as I'm sure you're aware, if you are a person, sometimes you can get you can get targeted by phishing emails or fake invoices, etc. Most of the people, they don't fight it if it's below a certain threshold, like below 20 euros, below 50 euros, 100 euros. Most of the time the people, they don't complain, or they may say, okay, I was done, that's on me, I won't get caught the next time. But in the end, if we were taking all of those smaller amount fraud, the figures would be significantly higher. 67 of the victims, they experienced a total loss of control over their bank accounts. So that really reflects to what we were discussing on the US market. So that's one of the most striking frauds. And finally, a number that I found also interesting is that 41% of the clients that experienced the fraud decided to close their account. So, also as a business, you need to understand that if your customers experience fraud, if you do not take care, also care on the human perspective, if you do not engage with them and provide them with the right support, there is almost one chance out of two that they will never get into your business again. They will never shop or never be a trusted customer. Finally, I have here a quote about Lloyd Banks. They released a press statement in October 2022, so it's a bit old, but I found the figure quite striking. They did this own internal assessment. They were looking at money laundering in general, and they, as part of their money laundering effort, they identified more than 130,000 mule accounts. So a mule account is typically an account that was taken over by an attacker, and they are using it to ship money or ship assets left and right in order to launder money. And if you are the owner of the account and everything has been taken over from you, you can even be charged on certain money laundering as a participant, even if things are happening are out of your control. So that's also a key concern for the victims, which sometimes have to prove and defend themselves legally in front of court at their own expense, on top of being a victim of identity theft. To give you also a practical example, because you might be saying, okay, but how do we get started with identity theft? How come that those hackers have access to personal information? I can give you here one example. So that's about United Health Group, which I'm sure you heard about because they were quite under the spotlight and earlier this year. Of course, one of their CEO was gunned down in the street. So I mean, there was a lot of press, and there was perhaps the biggest manhunt ever in the US. But here today, we're not talking about that CEO. We are talking about Change Healthcare, which is one of their subsidiary. And basically, what Change Healthcare does is that they process a lot of data on behalf of healthcare companies. So they do all this pre-authorization, making sure that you have healthcare coverage from an insurance company. They process the payment claims. So they are quite in the middle of the entire healthcare ecosystem, at least in the US, which is their primary market. So what happened to them? Basically, in February, they were hacked by a ransomware group that calls themselves the Black Cat. And if you are new to cybersecurity, just know that a ransomware, it's just a computer virus. Sometimes we call them malware. So this virus blocks your computer, blocks your server, and you no longer have access. You can no longer connect, or you can no longer look at your different documents. So everything is kind of paralyzed unless you pay a ransom. And sometimes, even if you pay, you do not have access. Do not get back to your data. Everything can be left as it is. In terms of short-term consequences, of course, all of the operations of Change Healthcare were disrupted. Some of the data was stolen, and 6 terabytes is a huge chunk of data. This included personal information, payment details, insurance records, other sensitive information such as the history of the payments, the history of the medical practitioners, home addresses, etc., all of which you can use to create fake identities or impersonate someone. The payment ransom was 2022 million, 22 million. However, when you look at the consequences for the entire healthcare institutions, it is really a low amount because some of those institutions were losing up to $100 million per day because they could no longer cash in some of the claims from the patients or some of the money due to the different surgery, different checks, or medical consultations. I should almost do an entire article about this case because it's still in the press. There are still some lawsuits that are going on. Here, I just gave you a quote of Rick Pollock, which is the president and CEO of the American Hospital Association. Basically, they think and they believe that this cyber attack is the most significant and consequential incident of its kind against the US healthcare system in history. So that's also to give you some weight. I have put the link here if you want to check the full timeline. Basically, what I want to catch your attention on is the figure at the bottom right in orange. They say that the cost of the ransomware attack has now risen to almost $2.5 billion. So, to give you an understanding of how striking this example can be in terms of data leakage, but also in terms of consequences for an entire industry. Because again, it was a critical provider producing and serving an entire industry and a lot of other clients and companies. So if by now you are thinking, okay, but what can I do about it as an individual? Basically, there are two areas to think about. First, as a person, so as a user or as a customer, the first thing is to be aware of your personal information that you share with all those third parties. And you need to understand that all of that creates what we call a digital footprint. And I really encourage yourself to type your own name in Google, understand what kind of data comes up so that you are aware of all the tricks or all the information that could be used against you. If, for example, you are publishing a lot of pictures about holidays, maybe if I type an email about a discount in a certain hotel resort, maybe you are more likely to click on my email, open it, and maybe fall into my trap. So you need to understand really what you are putting on internet, on the social media, etc., etc. Second, what I would advise is only to use your personal data only when necessary, and if you can also add some watermarks. So making sure that making sure with long effort, of course, attackers they can remove the watermark, but sometimes the attackers they receive a lot of data. They are going to use or the most obvious or the highest quality documents to forge themselves a new identity. So that's one way you can perhaps protect a bit more yourself. And finally, change your credentials because we didn't talk about it today, but a lot of the fraud actually come from failure of credentials, meaning that the hackers they reuse some of the passwords that have been leaked or that have been breached, and sometimes they just come and grab all of your data from a certain account. Finally, as an employee, so as a processor of perhaps someone else's personal data, there is this general golden rule about not collecting or not storing information if you don't explicitly need it, which also means that as a company, we all have legacy projects or historical projects that we keep because they are interesting from a knowledge based perspective, for training, for many things. However, as soon as you do that, there is the good practice of course, anonymizing everything, making sure that you do not keep any data that is now useless. Once the contract or once your work has been done, you should just capitalize on it, anonymize it, and then get rid of what's too personal or what is really not relevant anymore. So that's it about today. It was really an episode a bit in depth, but to show you how cybersecurity can be used and can enable a wider spectrum of fraud. In the end, it's really about the people and how you can protect yourself or be aware of the different techniques. And these are elements that we will explore as part of this curriculum. I'm also about to record some other episodes that I will release perhaps on Friday evening and also on Sunday. The next episode will be about why you should care about cybersecurity as a business, as opposed to today's video, but that's for later. Thank you. As usual, I'm interested in your feedback. Don't hesitate to ask comment. I will do my best to answer. Um, That's it. See you in the next video.